So I'm going to be doing a little talk about anxiety. So what is anxiety? Now, anxiety is an emotion. It's a normal human emotion, and it's what we feel when we are afraid, when we are frightened, or when we're tensed. It's a normal human emotion, as I've said, that is activated when we perceive danger or when we perceive a threat. Now, the thing that we perceive as either threatening or dangerous may or may not actually be threatening or dangerous in reality. So an example of something that is threatening and dangerous in reality would be if you're crossing the street and you're seeing a car charging at you at 100 miles an hour and it isn't going to stop. That is a situation that is correctly perceived as threatening and dangerous. And so the anxiety response in that situation would drive our behavior to completely jump the hell out of the way. However, if we're getting that same response when we, for example, see a pigeon, when a pigeon is flying around, or when we see a pigeon walking around minding its own business, we get this same response. We perceive the pigeon as threatening and we get this same anxiety response. And that's when anxiety can be a problem. And this is when anxiety disorders come into play. Now, anxiety is not only experienced through our emotion, so it's not only the feeling of being anxious, but anxiety can also be experienced by means of our physiological and physical sensations. Often when we're anxious, the actual feeling of being anxious is accompanied by a number of physical and physiological sensations in the body. A number of these, to name a few, would be increased heart rate. You know, sometimes when you're anxious, you can actually feel your heart beating. You can feel the heartbeats, and sometimes you can feel that you've got palpitations as well. Another symptom will be increased breathing. When you're anxious, your breathing increases. And sometimes you take in a lot of oxygen and you're not actually letting enough carbon dioxide out, and that can cause a whole host of symptoms in itself, anxiety symptoms such as feeling unable to concentrate or not being able to take in information. Another symptom of anxiety might be your chest. Your chest might start tightening, and you may feel like you are being restricted. You may feel as if something bad is going to happen. You might have that feeling in your stomach, that a really unpleasant feeling that something bad is going to happen. Now, these are all symptoms of anxiety. Now, often the behavioral response to anxiety is to avoid. So if there is a situation that makes us anxious, the human behavior, which is a normal human process, is to avoid. We avoid things that are threatening. This is why us as humans have been able to survive so long. If we avoid things that are threatening. But the issue comes about when we're perceiving things that are threatening, when in reality they're not threatening. That's when anxiety can be a problem, and it can mean that we avoid things in our lives that actually are important to us, or we avoid things in our lives that are attached to things that are important to us. So as a result, we do not do the things that are important to us. So for example, if family is very important to you, but you have anxiety about being in social situations, you might avoid your sister's wedding because you know it's going to be crowded there, even though being there for your sister and seeing her on her wedding day might be very important to you. So anxiety is tricky. Now, in terms of the anxiety response, what actually happens when we perceive something or a situation as dangerous? Well, initially what happens is the information from our senses, whether this is our eyes or our ears, is transferred to an area of the brain known as the amygdala. This is an area of the brain that contributes to emotional processing. So when the amygdala interprets this sensory information as dangerous and as threatening, it immediately sends a distress signal to the hypothalamus. Now, the hypothalamus is another area of the brain which functions as a sort of a command center that communicates with other areas of the body through the nervous system. Now, the hypothalamus then sends a signal, a nervous signal, to what we call the adrenal glands, which is just above the kidneys. And now these adrenal glands are responsible for releasing the hormone known as adrenaline. Now, adrenaline is pumped throughout the body and it causes a number of physiological changes, such as the increased heart rate I've been talking about, the increased breathing I've been talking about, and also the increased alertness. Because you're getting in more oxygen, a lot of the oxygen is being diverted to your brain, which causes you to be more alert. So you're in a state of high alert. Your senses are sharpened, your hearing is sharpened, your sense of touch is sharpened, your vision is sharpened, you're seeing exactly what is in front of you, your peripheral vision goes away, what is important is what is in front of you. And you get all those symptoms, a dry mouth, sweating. The anxiety symptoms are endless, and they can depend and change depending on the person. So you get that anxiety response. So this is the fight or flight response, we call it. It is a primitive response, which I guess in the primitive years it was very beneficial, and it still is very beneficial to have this fight or flight response. As I explained, if a car is driving at you, or a bear is charging towards you, which, you know, in some parts of the world it can be an occurrence where you're walking in the park and all of a sudden you see an 8-foot grizzly bear charging towards you. That fight or flight is going to kick in. You're not going to have really any time to think. It's going to kick in and drive your behavior to either fight or flight. So it is an important response, basically. It's an important response. But the problem with it is when it starts to fire off, when this fight or flight response starts to fire off, when actually there isn't really a threat, but our brain is perceiving there to be a threat based on perhaps our experiences, you know, our life experiences and our beliefs, then that's when we have an issue. That's when we have a problem, and that's when anxiety becomes a disorder, as you may call it.